Change my heart, oh God, make it ever true.
Today I want to introduce you to that fascinating thing called the Enneagram, or as it's also known, the 9 illusions. Enneagram simply means a 9-pointed diagram, which you will see behind me. The Enneagram is a study of sin and how sin affects my personality. Or perhaps I should say how sin infects my personality. The ancient church identified 9 principal sins. They called them cardinal sins, and each of these leads to one of the personalities. Now, I am fully capable of committing any of the 9 sins. I am a born sinner. And so it's likely that I will see myself in all 9 personalities. But all of us have 1 or 2 sins that tend to trip us up much more easily than the others. And that is what the Bible calls our besetting sins. And so, although I may see myself in all 9, there are 1 or 2 that really will describe me pretty accurately. And it's important to find out what they are. Now, each of the personalities has underlying it an illusion. And the illusion goes something like this. If only I could XYZ, then everything would be okay. No one would reject me and everybody would love me. But it's an illusion. It doesn't work. It's a fleshly way of getting people's approval. And the trouble with these illusions is that we have deliberately hid ourselves from knowing what our illusion is. And that's why the Enneagram is so helpful, that I bring my personality into the light of Christ and ask him to reveal to me what my underlying sin and illusion is. The truth will set you free. Now, with each one, we're going to give a number and a name. Now, the names are useful, but they also are problematical. The reason is that some of the names sound nicer than the others. For example, if I said to you, you're a perfectionist, you'd probably be a little bit defensive. But if I said to you, you're a caregiver, you'd probably say, oh, thank you very much. Now, that's just not true, because the fundamental truth is this, that all 9 personalities, when they're unredeemed, what the Bible calls in the flesh, are ugly. But all 9, when they're redeemed, what the Bible calls in the spirit, are wonderful. And whatever your personality type is, it enables you to bring gifts to the world that none of the others can. And so the secret is to discover my personality type, to embrace it, and to bring it into the light of Christ to be redeemed. Now, we believe that personality is pretty much set by the age of 4. It's fascinating, by the way, that very few brothers and sisters have the same personality type. But by the age of 4, it's pretty set, and I can't change it. I can't look at these and say, well, I don't like being a perfectionist. I think I'll become a caregiver. You can't. It doesn't work like that. These things are too deep-seated. I can only bring it to Christ to be redeemed. And so there are 9 personality types. Here they are. Number 1, the perfectionist. Number 2, the caregiver. Number 3, the achiever. Number 4, the artist. Number 5, the observer. Number 6, the loyal soldier. Number 7, the fun lover. Number 8, the tough guy. And number 9, the peacemaker. Now, in each one of these, I'm going to give you a short summary, and then we're going to take one character from the Gospels, mainly from the Gospel of John, and try to see how this works out in practice. So let's begin with number 1, the perfectionist. Remember that all 9 suffer from an illusion. The illusion of the number 1 is, if only I can be perfect, then everything will be okay and people won't reject me. And so they're afraid of imperfection. They try very hard to be good. They work out of good boy energy. And they can be more preoccupied with being right than with being kind. They can become judgmental and critical. They're always trying to fix everything. Their besetting sin, like all of the besetting sins, is surprising. It's anger. You don't see it because they try to hide it. They have learnt wrongly that to be angry is to be imperfect, so they repress it. But inwardly, they're actually very angry. They're angry with the world for being so imperfect. They're angry with the world for not listening to them. And they're angry with themselves for being so full of failings. But like all the types, they are wonderful when they're redeemed, when they're in the Spirit. For one thing, they are good people. How the world needs good people. They have a sense of idealism, without which the world can become very cynical. So they give us something to aim at in life. They have a great sense of justice because they hate what is wrong. And they stand up for the oppressed, sometimes channeling their natural anger to help set others free. And surprisingly, they have the gift of acceptance. That's because they find it so hard to accept themselves that once one has accepted himself, he learns to accept others with all their faults. And when one accepts you, you feel really accepted. Now, with each of these personality types, we're going to give an animal just to help us have a picture of what they like and to remember them. The animal for the number 1 is the mosquito, always buzzing around your head at night. Bzz, 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 I'm right, you're wrong. And we just want to swat them. That's a picture of the unredeemed number 1. Now, in all of these types, we're going to take one character from the Gospel, mainly from the Gospel of John. Here are the 9 characters. So which of the characters do you think represents the perfectionist? If you want to try and work that out for yourself, pause the video now. The representative of the perfectionist, and they feature very strongly in the Gospels, are the scribes and the Pharisees. John 19 says, they brought to the Pharisees a man who had been born blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, he does not keep the Sabbath. Notice how they can completely miss the miracle in somebody's life. The man who had been blind could now see. They didn't see that. All they see is their rules being broken. He did it on the Sabbath. And their means of judging whether Jesus is good or of God or not is whether he keeps their laws or not. And in John chapter 8, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. Notice both of them, they're bringing people, they're using people as objects. This is a poor, broken, sinful woman. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law of Moses, we're commanded to stone such women. Now what do you say? They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. They weren't just using the question, they were using the woman. This is so misogynist, to make her stand in front of all these men in her shame. And where's the man who was caught in adultery? They don't see the person at all, they only see the point that they want to make. Very typical of the number 1. In Matthew 23, Jesus says, Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you've neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, faithfulness, and I would add kindness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain at a gnat, but swallow a camel. Jesus makes the point here that they are neglecting human beings in favor of their rules and being right. I once heard a professor of pedagogics say the rules do not always encapsulate the ethics. And so the scribes and the Pharisees are the great Bible example of the unredeemed number 1. Jesus spent nearly 1/3 of the Gospel of John striving against the Pharisees, with their terrible tendency to regard their rules as more important than human beings. And then we move on to number 2, the caregiver. The illusion of the number 2 is, if only I can be needed, everything will be okay and people won't reject me. It's their fleshly way of getting people to approve of them. Number 2s are afraid of admitting their own need. I am the caregiver, don't ask me what my need is. As a result, they're actually very needy, but they don't admit it. So frequently you find they go to the fridge for comfort. Not infrequently, a number 2 is overweight. Number twos find it very hard to say no, so they actually get very depleted inwardly. The problem with the number two is when they get depleted and you don't appreciate them, then suddenly they can flare up at you. Woe betide if you forget their birthday. Their besetting sin, like all of them, is unexpected. It's pride. To look at them, you would never think so because they are such wonderful servants. But the heart of pride surely is to think that we don't need God, and they are experts at denying their own need. The trouble with them is they can use their servanthood to put people under obligation to them. They never complain about serving, but they certainly can blow up if they don't feel they're appreciated. Like all the others, when a number two is redeemed, they bring a wonderful gift, the gift of unconditional love, love that doesn't count the cost. They are wonderful caregivers, the Mother Teresas of this world. If you're in trouble and lucky enough to be looked after by a redeemed caregiver, you're a very fortunate person. And number twos are very comfortable with physical touch. Now, the animal for the caregiver is the cat, soft and cuddly and warm and purring on your lap. He is just lovely. Except that there are claws. If you do something he doesn't like, the claws come out. Very similar to Father Christmas, nice and cuddly and gives you presents. But we always say to the children, be careful, if you're not good he won't bring you presents. There are the claws, Santa with claws. So, as we look at our 10 characters, mostly from the Gospel of John, which one do you think is the caregiver? If you want to work this out for yourself, pause the video now. Now, people easily say Martha down the bottom there. Now, Martha did do a lot of serving, but she's not a 2. She complains about her serving. Caregivers never do that. Martha is something else. We'll come to that later. We're a little inclined to miss this one because the answer is actually a man. It's John the Apostle. John 13:23, one of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was leaning on Jesus' bosom. We'll find often that he refers to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. Caregivers are very easy to love. And notice that at the Last Supper he was leaning on Jesus' bosom. That's very intimate, a lot of touch involved there. Number twos are very comfortable with physical touch. In John 18, Peter had to wait outside the door at the trial of Jesus, but the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. There's the caregiver in operation. He knows that Peter's outside in the cold and excluded, and he goes to bring him in. Notice also that he talks very easily to a servant girl or to a high priest. Caregivers are really not concerned with rank and importance. And then crucially in John chapter 19, when Jesus hanging on the cross saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son." Notice again the reference to the disciple Jesus loved. Notice that he's the only disciple standing nearby. The others fled or stood at a distance, but the caregiver comes up close, even if it's very unpleasant. And why do you think Jesus asked John to look after his mother? Why didn't he ask his brothers? I suspect none of his brothers were actually great caregivers, but John, the great caregiver, from that day onwards takes Mary into his home, and you can be assured she was well looked after until she died. And so the Apostle John is the great example of the redeemed number 2, the Apostle of Love. Do you know in his 3 epistles, which are very short, they only take up 4.5 pages of my Bible, he mentions the word love 34 times. That's 5 times more regular than Paul in his epistles or Peter in his. The Apostle of Love. And now we turn to number 3, the achiever. The illusion of the number 3 is, if only I can be successful and look good, everything will be okay, people will love me and not reject me. It's their fleshly way of gaining people's approval. Funny enough, these people are often physically good looking. They often have great hair. Never go to a bald faith healer. Do you think he wouldn't have tried it on himself? Number threes are afraid of failure or afraid of looking bad. Appearance and image are very important to them. Their besetting sin is deceit. Outward appearance can be more important to them than inward integrity. So they put on a false appearance. What you see is not necessarily what you get. They are prone to worry more about what they look like than about what is going on inside them. They're not deliberate, compulsive liars. It's just that they'd rather tell an untruth than look bad. Like all of them, they are wonderful when redeemed. They give the world leadership, influence, getting things done. People follow them. They make good evangelists. Billy Graham was a number three. Just look at that hair. And because it doesn't come naturally to them, they have great integrity. In 70 years of Billy Graham's ministry, his enemies could not find a single piece of dirt to hold against him. Now the animal for the number three is the chameleon, able to change his appearance to fit the background. That's the number three. Everything is to do with outward appearance when he's not redeemed. He's willing to change his appearance or even change his principles or the truth so that he can fit in and not look bad. Well, which of our 10 characters from the Gospels do you think is the number three? If you want to work on that for yourself, pause the video now. The character typical of the number three is Herod the Tetrarch. That's not Herod the Great at the time of Jesus. It's actually his nephew. And he was the king in charge of the area of Galilee at the time of Jesus and John the Baptist. In Luke 3 we read, "But when John rebuked Herod the Tetrarch because of his marriage to Herodias, his brother's wife, Herod locked John up in prison." Now John was actually not threatening Herod's position as king. John had no power to make any difference to that. But John's great crime was that he rebuked Herod in public. He made Herod lose face, and that's the worst thing you can do to a number three. And so he paid the price for that, and he was locked up in prison. Herod couldn't bear not to look good. And then in Mark 14, there's so much of the three here. On Herod's birthday, a birthday is very important to a number three because it's an opportunity to have all his friends and show off. Herodias' daughter danced for the guests and pleased Herod so much that he promised on oath to give her whatever she asked. The very getting of the young girl to dance before a bunch of drunk men, that is just showing off. It's all to do with looking good, to impressing his guests. But it's so sordid. And then his rash oath to give her whatever she asked, that's also showing off in front of his guests. Look what I can do. Well, of course, prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me here on the platter the head of John the Baptist." The king was distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he ordered that her request be granted and had John beheaded in prison. Notice that he was distressed. He knew it was wrong. There was no reason to do this thing. And he'd made an oath that was unwise. Should he have broken that oath? Yes, he should. To break an oath is a sin, but to cut off someone's head is a far greater sin. Always choose the lesser of two evils. But to do it because of his dinner guests. He didn't want to look bad in front of his dinner guests. And so he cuts off John's head. It defies belief. And then in Luke 23, when Jesus is brought before Herod on trial, when Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased because for a long time he'd been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he hoped to see him perform a sign. He regards Jesus as something simply to entertain him, very much the number three, my entertainment, how I look, what I see, and he's greatly pleased. But most telling of all in Luke 23:11, "Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him. Dressing him in an elegant robe, they sent him back to Pilate." Now when Pilate wanted to punish Jesus, he had him beaten with 39 lashes. When Herod wants to punish him, he ridicules him. He makes fun of him because to Herod, that's the worst thing that you can do to someone, to make them look bad. And he dresses him in this elegant robe. There it is again. The outward appearance is what's important to Herod. A man completely taken up with outward appearance. And so Herod Tetrarch, the number 3 of the Gospel of John, Jesus called him a sly fox. There we have the number 3 unredeemed. So I hope you've enjoyed our introduction and the first 3. In the next session we will do number 4, 5 and 6.